Welcome to Rethink Travel podcast. I'm Natalie, your host. With my guests, we aim to bridge the knowledge gap between our lifestyle and its impact on our planet, your travel destinations, and local communities. So if you seek more from your travel than just a nice place to stay, let's get to the next story. Today, I'm very happy to host Beks Ndlovu. He is the founder of African Bush Camps, and I'm very happy to host you today, Beks. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Natalie. Great pleasure.
So let's start with a little bit of history and tell us about your story, you and your journey, and how you started this company 16 years ago.
So Natalie, post 16 years ago, and I guess pre 16 years ago, I come from a background of being a safari guide. So that's how I started off in the industry 25 years ago. And I was very fortunate to do a lot of guiding and camp management between Zimbabwe and Botswana as sort of my main two countries that I worked and lived in. And then after a while, actually, I was really interested in seeing the rest of Africa and traveling around the world. So I started my own company called Beks Safaris back then. And really, I was studying my services as a guide, traveling with families, small groups, and I extended that outside of Zimbabwe and Botswana to Zambia, to Namibia, to Mozambique, to Kenya, to Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda. So I started to see a lot more of Africa, and all of these countries, as you can imagine, all present a very unique experience, and cultures are different. And I always talk about the people of Africa as being very rich in color because we're also diverse and quite fascinating cultures. It became very, very evident that there were a lot of imbalances. There was a serious threat of biodiversity, and some places that I returned to over and over again, you could definitely see a shrink in habitats, which means the threat of these very, very rich areas, whether it's wildlife or it's a particular sensitive forest that people would start clearing up either to grow food for agricultural purposes or places that then became cattle. So this imbalance together with seeing how much poverty there is outside these wildlife areas that needed to be protected, it really weighed heavily on me, and I questioned how my business would have an impact in either slowing that down or stopping it completely. And it became very clear that, my business back then was about providing these beautiful experiences for people around the world. I'd obviously earn a living from it, provided I was out guiding. But the real impact of bringing others along to be advocates of Africa, advocates of the environment, was limited to just me. So the natural, progression of growth for me was, well, perhaps I would actually like to be home back in Zimbabwe, start my own safari camp, small camp, 12 beds, 6 tents only. That means immediately I would employ at least another 2-3 guides. I would employ at least another 12 to 18 staff members. And together we can begin to create a model that would sustain the areas around us and the people that are employed in it. And we can all be big advocates, but also I would have the ability to earn an income without necessarily me out guiding. So it was this model of, viability for myself, but also driven by a big sense of I need to have an impact. And that was 2006, I developed my first camp in Zimbabwe. Why Zimbabwe? It was in a park where I started my guiding career. It was also in a park, which is just outside of my home village. So I felt like I was on a journey with my home people.
Which park was that?
That's Hwange National Park. And so, and that's southern Zimbabwe. Just to put things into context, 2006 was when Robert Mugabe's government was in power. And economically, the country was really in trouble. Politically and reputationally, Zimbabwe was really sort of not a very attractive place for people to travel to. So on realizing the financial risk that I was exposed, I had the opportunity to develop a second camp in Botswana, which at that stage, Botswana was the golden child and was very, very attractive. So this opportunity that I got was in an area that's just really famous for its wildlife. It's on the outskirts of Chobe National Park, an area called the Linyanti, where today we have 3 safari camps. But it was initially that one safari camp that I developed into Linyanti that became very successful. And the finances from that allowed me to balance the investment in Zimbabwe. So now I sat there with 2 safari camps over 30 staff and over 6 guides between the two places. It felt like we're making progress in terms of our impact. And by the way, concurrently back then, 16 years ago, we decided that we were not going to gather up and get wealth before we give it away. Because the whole impact and the whole, drive for me was about making an impact and making a difference to our communities and to our wildlife, it was very important to give at the same time. And this principle of giving was inspired by, I don't know if you've heard of Yvon Chouinard. He's the founder of Patagonia and the apparel, clothing, outdoor gear. But his whole principle was 1% capital for nature, which really evolves around if you're benefiting from nature, you need to be able to give back. And his principle was 1% back out of his turnover. I'm pleased to say 16 years later, with all the projects that we've got and the force of our foundation, which really is at the epicenter of our organization, we now give away 2.5% of our annual turnover. And we give that from the commercial side into our foundation so that we can take care of all the admin and can roll out all the various programs in the various places. We want to be an organization that goes out and says, if I go and fundraise through my donor group for a project for $100, that full $100 goes to where it's needed the most, not administration or paying expert salaries to my employees, on donor funding. So that kind of thing is really important as part of the principles of who we are and the journey that we're on. So 16 years later, we're just about to open in June our 17th camp, which is our second camp in Zambia. And the foundation is still growing strong. And we've had an amazing opportunity, I believe, in the last 2 years to rethink our purpose and our values and what we really are about. And our new strapline is sharing and conserving Africa together, which is really a principle of bringing the commerce side of the business with the community and conservation side of our business into one. So we're very excited about the future of travel. And for us, it's really about how can we ensure that whatever impact we have and whatever conversations we have within our client base, within our partners, is all about the bigger picture so that we're all enjoying this business as much as other people are benefiting, and we're bringing along whole communities along the journey.
Amazing. And right now, you said you're opening your second camp in Zambia, but you have 6 in Botswana and 9 in Zimbabwe, right?
Yeah. So in total, this is our 17th camp.
So do you have returning guests, and do they have a different behavior every time they come back? And do you see this industry going in a better direction after the past 2 years also?
I do believe that, especially on the interim, the people that are traveling now, certainly for us, our client base, are people that are very, very careful in their choice of places to go. They're having all the right conversations. I actually lead a couple of safaris a year that are all where the proceeds all get donated to our foundation for conservation and community. And the thinking, and most of the people that buy those safaris, by the way, are returning guests who've been with us before. So they've had an experience with us and they're coming back and they're saying, we want to come back and experience more and give more. So we certainly are seeing that. And I want to believe in the power of the awakening of human beings, that people won't just go back to the same old or what they're used to when things sort of return back to normal, as it were. I do believe there's a certain kind of clientele who we can have conversations with, rich conversations with, and they understand the purpose and they can plug in to our purpose and we're aligned. And I think in the most sort of epic world that one dreams of is being able to host guests and do business with the people who you're aligned with. That's the real dream, right? So the conversations that we've been having over the last few months as a team is how can we begin to control what relationships we have, who we do business with. And I think that's important. It's important because we believe there's certain conversations that need to be heard. There's a certain amount of responsibility we need to take on as educators to bring about the awareness of the challenges, of the imbalances that exist within our continent, which we believe is important for the regeneration of not just, it's no longer enough to be sustainable, but is how can we regenerate, how can we claw back and return dignities and regenerate cultures and regenerate vast tracts of land that we've lost. So I think it goes one step further. And that can only be done if we're all fully plugged in and fully taking on that responsibility of becoming the educators. Not the educators because we know it all, but simply because we are the custodians and we're closest the most to these areas, and we're inviting people to be aware of the rate of degrade, or at least the rate of loss of these wilderness areas, at the rate of loss of cultures and dignity in some cases in certain villages.
Exactly. And this brings me back to why people travel. Travel will continue, so it just needs to be drastically different. When people go, we hope to inspire them to ask the right questions. Why do they go somewhere? And what will they bring back home? What kind of mindset shift so they can be better and travel better? There are so many terms for these travelers. We like to call them conscious travelers or curious travelers.
Conscious travel is certainly a big word that we use to target or describe our kind of clientele. Conscious, curious, aware, those are definitely all the right words to describe the kind of people that we're looking to host in our camps. And it's not just about hosting them in our camps now, but it's also about partnering with them for the future of the continent.
Yeah. So how do you make sure that the travelers and your community members and your staff have meaningful connections?
So I think it all starts with how do we relate with the tour operator, the agent that brings us that business? Have they had a conversation or sent them certain information about what to expect, both from a wildlife perspective in terms of the experience, and also from an engagement perspective with our staff and with the community? And I think that's where it starts. It's almost like the first filter, because if those conversations have been had, then by the time they arrive on the ground, they're sensitized to the fact that these conversations will happen, whether it's in the form of a guide, putting up a slideshow and giving guests a lecture of a project that we're involved with in the community, or a conservation program that we support within the area. And all of these lectures and discussions are happening throughout a guest stay. And one of the things that we've shifted around as part of the way in which we have enough time to fully engage in these areas is we've actually changed our minimum stay in our remote safari camps to 3 nights. Whereas in the past, we would have these 2 nights here, 2 nights here, 2 nights here. It's barely enough time to really make a significant difference and have those engaging, meaningful conversations with guests. So now making it 3 nights means that we have 2 full days when it's not just about the wildlife, but also the exposure to the communities or exposure to some conservation project. And all of these things that we're lining up are ensuring that we've got the best opportunity to actually make a very big difference and provide opportunities with our guests to partner with them in the long-term picture of being able to contribute positively to our planet.
Can you tell us about 1 or 2 of your conservation projects that you want people to know about?
Sure. So again, we'll maybe stick with Hwange, where the first camp was. So we've collaborated with other operators in the area and formed an organization called Conservation and Wildlife Fund. And we levy all our guests an amount of $20 per bed night. And through this pool of funding, we then fund an organization to provide support for the rural district councils. If there's any problem animal control or if there's any poaching in the area, to the extent that we now head up a committee amongst the local population that deals with poaching, that also deals with problem animal control. We also support other governmental organizations which over time, because of economic hardships, have actually failed to continue doing the things that they're doing. So we're providing GAP, the funding, and also the manpower and resources, where we've got over 24 game scouts that we deploy under our own umbrella. But we probably have another 30 plus other game scouts that are not necessarily under our care, but we provision them, we resource them so that they are spreading out and providing protection, especially in a time that's been heightened during COVID, where people have either lost their jobs or they've had reduced income, and these areas have become quite vulnerable. So we've become very, very active, even in the last 2 years, with that specific program. Now, if you ever look at that program like that, that's really aimed at not so much the people element or the human element, but more of the security element, protecting the wildlife directly. Now, that you can do quite successfully, but only through making sure that the human factor or the human capital is also in a point where they understand why you're doing that. So we have other projects. In general, what we say is in each area, we'll try to have one conservation project that directs at the impact of wildlife directly, and then the other one must be a human element. And we've continued to support schools, to support clinics, to provide a whole business model around empowering communities to feed themselves. So throughout our camps, we've encouraged them to do product. Where we've done refurbishments, we've bought stuff directly from there, and we're trying to find a place where they can market their products that they make, whether it's sewing dresses, making jewelry from recycled paper. All of these empowering projects are equally as important in driving some measure of success for these communities. But also, we can't really impact a community at high level and expect them to come on board with conservation unless we provide them with good health support and a good education support, even from an elementary level. We can't complain about future leadership if we're not addressing leadership from when they're young. And we all know that at the moment where the world is in trouble today because of very poor leadership. That's questionable. And so we believe that as part of our responsibility at a very early stage is having that level of impact from the get-go. So these are the high-level projects that we have actually in most places that we operate where there's a community to partner with.
Yeah, what a topic, right? The future generation, there's a heavy weight on their shoulder right now. And I do have a lot of hope.
If we are going to place all of this hope in future generations, I believe today we need to make sure that we create the platform, them to have a fighting chance to be able to fulfill that hope.
This is also why I chose to create this platform as a positive message to show that there are ways and there are solutions.
Yeah.
This really brings me also to your vision on this topic of sustainability. As you talked about, it is more than sustainability. It's really about regeneration. There's so many properties around the world that we're doing amazing things in connection with nature. But then all these certifications and all these narrative around sustainability came on the table. But the ones doing it without really promoting it got left a little behind. And there was this kind of disconnect at some point. And I just wanted to see how you navigated the whole situation. And when it was something that you've been doing before, it was a topic of interest.
So I think it is a very interesting conversation around that, because I think people with money and resources are able to complete certain checklists and tick the boxes. It doesn't necessarily mean that what they're doing has a measure of depth that's having a real impact. So I think today the world is demanding more transparency around being able to publish and talk about what is the real impact that you've seen within your communities over the last 5 years, so that you're not just providing a lip service. And I think people are being called to task more and more, and particularly when you are a big advocate for funding from donors, they want to at least be able to see that you're spending that money wisely and you're having a real impact on the ground. So I think you're quite right in that there's a lot of organizations such as ourselves that with very little resources were just doers. That's just what we did. But we also have realized and made the transition, particularly over the last 5 years, that if we're going to be advocates, if we're going to believe this, we also want to be in the forefront of being part of the leadership to creating that change. And the organizations that come to my mind right now is the Long Run that we've been members of for the last few years. So being able to I think become a part of that or Lionscape coalition, where we're talking about how do we save the landscape of big cats, particularly lions, which we're a member of. I was part of a team that incubated Regenerative Travel, which is now a platform, this amazing platform of travel professionals and hoteliers around the world globally who are having conversations around how do we play our part in regenerating travel and what does it actually mean? So I think it is important at some point, particularly if you've been a doer, to get involved in platforms and organizations that hold you to account, organizations that you can learn from, that you can participate in certain things so that you're not just operating in silos. I think the big thing about humanity going forward is going to be how can we together create these amazing platforms where we recognize that whatever we all stare at in the horizon, in the landscape, affects all of us the same. So, if we get into a position where we collaborate a lot more, we can achieve a lot more together than singularly. And I think for us, certainly that is the narrative. We're recently in the making and about to launch with, again, other products, other trade partners, a new concept that you'll hear about more and more called African changemakers, where we're saying we would like to invest more capital into Africa. Because again, the principle is that as long as people are coming to Africa, we should be investing more as businesses, whether I'm in Africa or through our trade partners. And we're co-investing an amount starting with $5, which doesn't seem like a lot per partner, but that means we have $10 combined. And that means over time, we can accumulate what we're calling a war chest, which is about building financial resilience for the continent, for Africa, because we are constantly having some kind of crisis, whether it's the COVID pandemic, or it's Ebola, or it's war, or it's some kind of financial crisis somewhere. And we're saying that, at some point we need to recognize that as long as we've got people coming, we've got the cash flow to do certain projects and to keep some of our not-for-profit campaigns going. But what happens when for 2 years we have zero income? We potentially are in a place where if we don't build financial resilience, we compromise the very work that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And we want to be able to progress. You can't just freeze nature and say there'll be no poaching, there will be no starvation, there'll be no poverty. Things degrade very quickly. So this really for us is sort of our next move to say, how can we build financial resilience together with other people on this journey and bring more capital, make more available to the continent? So we're very excited about African changemakers, but it is these organizations and these innovations and these conversations that are rich that together we can have with other people and form these long-term strategic partnerships that will help create a better continent.
What do you hope to really impact your guests with the most after visiting one of your camps?
I think more than anything else is a sense of understanding of the sensitivities of these fragile ecosystems which support whole communities. And it's about looking at the whole picture. How can they become a part of that? And I think generally humanity wants to become something bigger than themselves. And so all our guests are asking, how can we help? How can we get involved? And we want to create platforms and programs where they can get involved indefinitely, where they can educate their children and their children can have these conversations around their schools, and we can create a whole culture of awareness around the need to conserve these fragile ecosystems. That's really what we hope to get. Yes, we obviously want to run a good tourism business that's financially sustainable, but really our purpose goes hand in hand of sharing and conserving Africa together because of the depth of richness that it can provide for Africans and for the continent and its wilderness areas.
Yeah, and I want to come back to your safari guides also. How many guides do you have right now across all camps?
So we have about 54 guides between the three countries.
Mostly trained by you?
So we have probably trained, I would say, at least 3/4 of them. We have annual guide training programs. Actually, we just had one last month that I attend the first 2-3 days, but we have other trainers that we bring on board to basically conduct the various aspects of guiding. We're very much a big believers of putting as much resources into our guides and our people because they're the rock stars, they're the superstars, and it begins and ends with them. So because of my background as a guide, I'm very passionate about that. And it is part of our descriptions, actually, when people ask us, what does luxury mean to you? One of the definitions of luxury is being in Africa, in a wilderness area, and being with one of the best naturalists or guides in the world. That, to me, in the wilderness space is luxury.
I love that you gave me the definition before I asked, because being in this industry for such a long time, seeing all these hotels around the world, the word luxury has such a different meaning to a lot of people. But I'm glad that everyone on this podcast and everyone around Rethink Travel have a very similar vision of it. I do want to ask you, because 3/4 of the guides that you train on site, so do they come with the right mindset, or how do you inspire your teams to really be the custodians of their land? How does that work? Is there a shift that happens after they meet you, or do they come in knowing what they're supposed to be protecting, or how?
I think most guides in today's circles, so as large of an industry as it is across Africa, but within internally, I feel like it's such a small industry that, everybody rides on their reputation. So most people know who I am in terms of guides in our industry. And I think our message has been unquestionably strong in terms of what we're advocates of. So very quickly, when people come into our business, they come into a culture of guiding that is very, very strong. And they come in as part of the ABC guiding family, which has a certain narrative, it has a certain language that people adopt and feel very comfortable. Because, these guys aren't just Jeep jockeys who pick up people, point stuff at, and then drop them off again. These are guys who interact and share their journeys and life stories. And I believe that, we do a pretty good job of making sure that the guest experience at the forefront is about every character, every personalities that guests come across are telling a story. Because fundamentally, I believe we all have beautiful, wonderful stories to tell. And so I think guides naturally like the ability to be able to have that platform to tell their unique story. And that, in a way, permeates even through to the waiter, to the host staff, just being able to make sure that they're not these invisible shadows that just make things happen, but they're part of the narrative, they're part of the story, and that they have a platform to tell their story as to who they are, where they've come from, and what their journey is. And I think in today's world, that's what people are interested in.
It is. And we are here to amplify the voices of the people who have these stories to tell. I want to get to your latest lodge in Zambia, Light on Earth Luxury Camp. Can you tell us a little bit about what it means and what you accomplished there?
So the Zambezi Valley is, again, it's one of these super ecologically sensitive area that over time has lost a number of wildlife species that have become extinct locally. But, it's also in the floodplain of the Zambezi Valley. So anything that happens upstream could affect everything downstream. It is in such remote areas that poaching could be out of control if not kept in check because of its remoteness. It's very difficult to secure, it's very difficult to manage purely because of its remoteness. So our attraction there was really more of an extension of the work that we're already doing on the Zimbabwean side. And we wanted to participate with the conservation work as a continuation of what we're already doing and partner with others on that side of the river. The lodge itself is built with lightweight steel structures that are pretty much manufactured off-site and like Lego put together, raised above the ground on site in this beautiful, magnificent forest down in the lower Zambezi. And I think it's that kind of clever build in this day and time that makes a lot of sense as opposed to movements of vast quantities of earth in order to put up a solid structure. But everything that's been chosen to be utilized within is also very carefully thought out in terms of its power demands. So for the first year, we are going to measure and gauge our impact by the use of generators, and then followed by the second year, where we then flip that to a solar farm that basically runs the entire place. So again, the model is going to be very evident in terms of the measurement of impact of what it takes to run such a place in such a remote area. And in all our builds and all our projects, new projects that we've developed over the last 10 years, we create these solar farms that basically run the entire camp so that we're off-grid. But the waste management systems that we also employ to take care of the waste is such that it recycles the water and puts water back into nature. But free of the use of chemicals or anything that is going to be harmful to the environment. So all of these things are very carefully thought through, which includes the procurement of certain amenities and things that you would put in the lodge that would be very light in terms of how impactful it can be on the environment. So it's all of that we think through that we try to then put within the lodge. I mean, the next big challenge, which we're looking forward to, is how can we, in such a remote location, partner with some of the communities in the area to bring farm to table in terms of our inputs for food, because that's becoming more and more quite a big thing that people like to be able to consume locally. So it's all of these exciting things that we want to bring to the project, that we want to bring to the table, literally that we believe are going to make a meaningful impact to what we're doing.
And how do you manage the expectation of your guests when prioritizing conservation and sustainability efforts? You said you work with the right travel agents that usually do the groundwork.
Look, it's we certainly aspire to work with people that bring us the right kind of people that already have a sense of knowledge and awareness. But it goes without saying that things get lost in translation. And I think it's really up to us to be able to then have an education piece where we talk about why, we might not have certain things or why we don't do things in a particular way. And it's ongoing. It's part of our process of educating the world, I think, in general. And we may not win everybody over, but we certainly are going to die trying it.
And I'm definitely going to be here supporting you and trying to educate before they step a foot in your camps. So over the past 16 years, you supported over 70 projects. How do you just keep going and, strive to help more people and moving into the future? What is the grand picture?
I know it sounds like a very impressive number, 70 projects. Actually, we've probably done over 72 projects that we've been involved with. Some of them were projects that we got involved with, got them up and running, and then we would exit. Always the perfect projects, I believe, are the ones that then enjoy a measure of success, and we don't necessarily have to go and get involved with them. But over the last 2 years, I think what we've said to ourselves is that we've done actually almost too much. And our next phase of how we operate our foundation is less is more. And so really strip down and start to wind down some of the projects that we've done in the past. Make sure that, of course, the spent resources in the past don't go to waste, but we actually want to do less and go deeper. So right down to the extent that I think we're currently sitting on a project register of about 24, 26 projects. And by the time we're done with it, we would really like to have far less than that, to the extent that in each region or area that we operate in, we have one conservation project and one community-oriented project. And then in that way, there's always going to be overarching little projects that become part of the bigger picture of that one project. But we wouldn't be necessarily calling them separate projects. And in this way, we can really integrate the commercial side of the business with the foundation side of the business, because after all, our objective is the same. And that's why we've created the strapline of sharing and conserving Africa together. So in terms of how do we move on from this, I think that we have a real opportunity to have long-term, deep impact projects that we can go back and measure, that we can stay connected with as part of our narratives.
Very nice. We'll be here following your work. Anything more you want to share about the African bush camps?
So other than our new camp, Lola Bezi, which we're launching in June, during the pandemic, we were able to open up a new camp called Kwai Ledwood in Botswana, which we're very excited is almost coming up to a year old already. But we opened that during the pandemic, and that is a project that we've been working on for 5 years. But in particular, we're very proud that our one of our projects in the Linyanti expeditions, which really only got half a season before the pandemic hit, is now going to be fully opened as of next month. And it's a really sort of lightweight expedition, adventure, glamping type camp in this magnificent wilderness area of the Chobe in a private concession. And projects like that always are exciting for me because they take me back to our origins of how we started in terms of our safari camp. And we like to create these expedition type camps alongside our signature camps because we believe that is also a texture that we should never miss that Africa is about. I think if we only send people to Africa and they experience just our signature camps, there's a certain element of grittiness that we would be depriving people of having to experience. So that's quite an exciting project for us as well.
And you did continue to operate all your camps during the pandemic, and you did continue to prioritize conservation. And this was a very challenging but admirable thing to do. I've really enjoyed talking to you about the camps and your work as a guide and your vision on conservation and regeneration, which is a very important topic of conversation. So I do want to hear about your hopes and dreams for the next 16 years. What's in your grand vision?
It's a very big subject, naturally. But I guess, like anything else, how do we get to a place of balance where it's not about the volumes and the occupancy, but rather about two things. One, choosing people that we're aligned with in terms of our philosophies to come and visit our camps and partner with them long term. And at the same time, making sure that we are trying as much as possible to cast the net wider in bringing people along to join this vision, to join and align with our philosophy. And how do we, together with our trade partners, harness this group or this clientele, where together in this three-part partnership, we can make a real meaningful and lasting difference and balance all of those efforts with being able to be profitable. I mean, I think that's the ultimate dream.
Nice. And what is the one message you want to be remembered for?
I guess naturally it would be the openness with which we're willing to collaborate and work with other people, whether it's competitors or it's people that, feed into our product. And I think our industry is so shrouded with this fixation of competitors and keeping things in secret, not coming to the table with learned lessons. I think that we would like to be known as a company and as a body that embraces competition, but at the same time wants to hold hands with people all around us to be able to make a meaningful difference in everything that we do.
Thank you so much, Beks. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you for spending your time with us today, and don't forget to subscribe for more conversations like this one. You can find me on Instagram at Rethink Travel and support this show on Patreon. Have a great day.